Thanks for tuning in to another show in the next Reel family of film podcasts.
Want to skip those ads and get early access?
Become a member at truestory.fm/join and discover all the other great perks that come with it. Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the next Reel family of shows on True Story FM. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
Confirmed. It's Pete Wright.
On today's episode, we have invited cinematographer Nicole Hirsch Whitaker to talk about The Conformist, a movie she likes. Nicole is an ASC cinematographer whose recent credits span the first two episodes of Netflix's record-breaking One Piece and the feature film Dust Bunny, which earned her a Best Cinematography nomination at the Film Independent Spirit Awards. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you to talk about all the multitudes of amazing projects you've been a part of. Before we do, let's start with just getting a sense of you and your background, how you got where you are as a film lover, as an image maker. You started in still photography, is that right?
Yeah, I started. So when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to go to a great creative high school where they taught photography and video art and all kinds of like really fun, quirky, creative subjects, including also my English teacher would have us read a book and then we'd watch a movie. So we would read Moby Dick and then he'd show us The Conformist, and then we'd read Lord Jim and he'd show us a Antonioni movie. And I mean, he was just this incredible film buff who decided to incorporate film into his English and literature class. So as I was studying still photography, I also got this sort of crash course on European films, which I'd never seen. So,
yeah.
Did you know as a still photographer that at some point you were going to be drawn into videography? Like how did transitioning to motion pictures work for you?
Well, I think because I hadn't seen films like the films that he was showing us when I was in 10th grade, I think it's also just an ignorance in terms of, American filmmakers, that you think of them as not being as cinematic as European filmmakers, unless you saw The Godfather or Apocalypse Now. And I think the films that I grew up on were very popcorn movies. And so I didn't really know that in my country that there were filmmakers out there making the kind of films that they were making overseas. So I stuck with still photography for a long time, thinking that was more of an art medium that I wanted to go into because, just in terms of the way I like to frame and I liked shooting in black and white. I didn't really see much of a transition into filmmaking as a black and white cinematographer. But I loved film. So when I applied to college, I applied to Tisch. I ended up going to film school. Almost switched back to the photography department just because I didn't really know how to tell stories. And so my films were kind of boring. They were pretty, but they were boring. As my Russian film teachers told me, very boring. I was like, well, maybe I'll just be a commercial cinematographer, which is what I ended up doing for 15 years and dabbling in narrative. And then realizing, what I loved about film was telling stories. So I kind of did maybe a little bit of an opposite career track to most people. I did a backpedal back into narrative storytelling and basically don't do commercials much at all anymore. So I tried to just, find my way. It took a while, but eventually, I felt like I feel like I'm now doing what I should be doing. So
that's fantastic.
Hey, don't sleep on those Nespresso campaigns. Those will pay the bills. Am I right?
I got to tell you, I definitely made more money when I was shooting commercials. That's for sure. I didn't have to work the crazy hours I work, which is the problem. Is I should have done that when I was younger and done
right.
Yeah, older. That's what I'm saying. I had a reverse, osmosis in terms of definitely made the wrong decision.
You also spent time working in documentary, and so that's another interesting fold in the different directions that you were pushing with projects like Girl Rising and Montage of Heck. As far as your kind of the tonal differences that you were using and exploring in all of these different things, like shifting between commercials, which have a very specific look, and then documentaries, which have their specific look, and then going into narratives. What's your process in, I guess, shifting from mode to mode as you're kind of moving from one medium?
Yeah, well, I never shot a traditional documentary where you just get a camera and throw it on your shoulder. Girl Rising was scripted and Montage of Heck was scripted. So they had, we created a look for them. And so it's a little different than the traditional documentaries. I get called sometimes documentaries and I'm like, I am so the wrong person. Like I'm not like one of the, it's like, hey, someone's doing something over there. Let's like spin the camera around, because I'll be like, no, the light's not nice. So we're going to spin back this way. And they'll be like, but you missed them off the bridge, and I'm just like, oh, sorry, it wasn't backlit. So I always am like telling people when they call me for documentaries, like, unless it's controlled, I'm really not the right person for it. But still, even Girl Rising, like, we packed up cameras and we hiked into the middle of nowhere in Ethiopia. And then we spent, many days with the script trying to find the most beautiful shots. And obviously there was no dialogue. So it was just, for me, coming from still photography, I was creating these beautiful still images with some movement, very little camera movement. And the same, we did Ethiopia and then Haiti and then Morocco. So, Egypt. So yeah, so again, I took, some of what I'd learned in every single type of filmmaking to bring it into what I'm doing now, which is definitely more structured, scripted work. So
I will say, I was talking to my son about who I was going to be talking to today, and I was rattling off the different projects. And when One Piece came up, that was the one where he's just like, oh my God, so cool. He was so excited that I was going to be talking to you because of your work on One Piece. What is the process of going from a massive manga anime that is just like so much work that's already out there, building that visual world so that it's still honoring everything that had come before it, while also working as kind of this one camera live action project?
That was so there was a lot of pressure on that project for sure. I'll tell you, the first reason is because my kids were huge fans. So
okay, see, it's the kids.
It's the kids. My son literally my older son has a tattoo from the show on his chest.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
big fan. So yeah, I had worked with Mark Jobst, who is a director I'd done another superhero show with called Jupiter's Legacy. And then Netflix brought One Piece to him and basically asked him to develop it. And he called me while I was working on Bad Sisters, which is a totally obviously different kind of show, and asked me if I could leave the show early to come do One Piece with him in Africa. And I was like, I can't say no, because my children will never speak to me again, first of all. And it was a little scary because I felt like every IP before that in that genre had not really been accepted by the fans, or not necessarily that they weren't good. It just, they didn't resonate with them as being something that they felt was as good as or better than the anime or the manga. So we talked about it a lot. And Mark was just very adamant and had a very strong opinion, with the showrunners and the producers about, keeping it really grounded. And so that at the core of the project, it wasn't about the visuals being the most incredible part. It was about the story of the Straw Hats. So we talked about, how to come up with a visual style that would honor it, blah, blah, blah. We did a ton of R&D. We prepped in Africa for 4 months. Prior to that, prepped for about 6 months, coming up with the look of the show. We built lenses for the show from scratch.
Really?
So that we could have, anamorphic feeling, but we still needed, close focus and deep focus. So Hawk built us a hybrid lens. We also wanted large format. So yeah, so it was really cool. So we got to develop lenses, and then we developed this LUT based on a photographer that we both loved. And then just rolled from there. But at the end of the day, it was really about, obviously we did lots of visual effects, lots of stunts, lots of special effects, tried to do as much in camera as we could. But it was definitely the most fun project in terms of like being involved in developing something that had never been done before. So it was really fun.
It's an extraordinary piece, and I can't think of a higher compliment that I can give you other than it's already catnip for a guy like me, but my wife also loves it.
Oh,
right? That's something big. Like, she usually comes to the stuff I watch with a real like brush off kind of attitude. She sat down with me with One Piece and just had a blast. It feels so extraordinarily practical and leading from the first of all, how do you tell Sharon Horgan I'm leaving early after working on 2 shows back to back with her? Like, does she hold grudges? Do you ever get a relationship with her again? We're in love with Shining Vale and Bad Sisters. Absolutely extraordinary. But then going from One Piece to see how you land in Dust Bunny, these properties have visual style to burn, Nicole. These are unbelievable worlds that you create. There are so few, to my eye, cinematographers working at this level of visual exuberance. I mean, I feel like I could spend the next hour just showering praise on the somatic experience I get watching this stuff. It really is. It is incredible. It's incredible. Where does that come from? The One Piece. I will jump to Dust Bunny, like being able to capture. We were talking about, Andy and I were talking about it, how it feels so much like a Jean-Pierre Jeunet. Like I imagine that we're actually looking at a very young Amelie, except for there's the mob and monsters, right? Like it has that exact vibe. And I'm just curious what goes into capturing that tone that is so foreign and so familiar for those of us in the audience.
I mean, thank you so much. I mean, listen, cinematography, of course, is so important to me, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is the story, and, capturing the right way to tell a story through the photography. And, that's why it's so fun to jump around and do something, like Bad Sisters. That's, more of a grounded kind of, I wouldn't say normal totally, but definitely more normal than those shows or films. But it's really comes down to, my captain, the director, and letting me have fun and wanting to take that journey. And, all 3 of those directors, we had lots of conversations about what films we liked and what we wanted the end product to be. And, especially, One Piece, obviously we had a lot of visuals from the anime. Dust Bunny, Brian Fuller, created Hannibal and American Gods. So he's just like a crazy visual person. And he had done concept drawings for Dust Bunny. And we immediately talked about Amelie and City of Lost Children and Spielberg and all these, filmmakers that we loved. But it takes that person to jump on board with it, because none of them were safe. And even Bad Sisters, I got some complaints at first that it was too dark, because Sharon.
I don't think it was the cinematography that made that show dark, principally.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, but it was, and it's funny because we started shooting the you shot where the funeral, and I was like, well, yeah, it's not light and bright and cheery. It was a funeral, but it was still funny. Right. But yeah, Sharon and I joked about that a lot, because she was just like, you're taking me out of my comfort zone. But yeah, so I think, again, for me, I just want people to have fun when they're watching what I do. So I think part of that whimsy in the camera and the lighting comes from, I'm just a kid at heart, and I just want people to go to the movies or turn on the television and just be like, this is something I've never seen before. This is so much fun. And it's one of the reasons I don't work probably as much as I used to, because I have a hard time finding those projects and finding those people. And, I wish that it was the back in the day where you had a director and that's the only person you worked with, so you really were able to create that visual language together and just, grow together and get better and better and better. And one of the things that's hard about, I do a lot of television is, especially when you have multiple directors or you're jumping onto something or there's a lot of voices, it's harder to do that. So all 3 of those projects, 2 were television, 1 was a film, had directors that were very supportive. So that's kind of where that comes from.
Well, I mean, it has an amazing look, and I love everything about Dust Bunny. But one thing I'm really curious about, and again, obviously a lot of this comes from Brian Fuller, but I think a lot of it is decisions that the 2 of you are making as far as trying to figure out how you're going to capture this look. But the fact that you went so widescreen, 3:1 as far as an aspect ratio, which I hadn't heard of before. I'm like, who shoots 3:1? It's crazy to me. And I was looking at it on the screen and I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, is this cropped right? What is going on? It was such a fascinating thing. And then to kind of look at the idea of the floor is such a key part of the story as far as not wanting to touch the floor and kind of capturing that danger zone and kind of like the floor is lava mentality that you have in the story. It made for such an interesting visual element to add to everything else that was going on in the story. Like, what were the conversations about trying to kind of create this world that was going to be that much of a specific aspect ratio?
Yeah. So what happened was when we were in LA, Brian and I went to Arri to test lenses, and I tried to keep it simple. I brought out like 3 different lenses for him to look at. The lenses that we ended up using were the Arri Alphas. I had shown him some images from Batman that Greg Fraser had shot. He loved it. And I said, one of the things about these lenses is they're very, very detuned. So we're going to have to kind of be center punched most of the time, or we can, maybe get a slightly less detuned version of them. But he just fell in love with them. And then as they were changing the crop, because I said, we can either shoot widescreen, we can shoot 2:1. And he's like, well, what happens when you don't have the crop on at all? It was totally Brian saw it. And I was like, well, nobody does that. I was like, it's 2.4 is like pretty much industry standard. I mean, you can go VistaVision and you can go 2.7, but that's usually if you're shooting film. And he was like, well, let's just not crop it. And he's like, because look at all that beautiful fall off that you lose from the lenses. And he's like, let's try to embrace that. And I was like, great. That's so fun. I said, but the studio's going to freak out, especially when it gets to streaming. And he was like, but let's just try. I was like, I love this. I mean, like, all of a sudden I'm just like, oh my God, like I have the crazy captain that I love. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
So we chose the lenses. One of the techs from Berlin came down and Arri was great. They gave us 2 sets. We had one set that was like super detuned, so it had major fall off. So even if it got cropped 2.40, we knew that you'd still have some of that quality. And then we had the less detuned ones where you could still hold 2 people, never on the sides, but you could still hold them like inside of the 2.40. Like, and I had this incredible focus puller, Chris Summers, who literally, like, he knew if Sigourney went like this, she'd be out of focus. Because, we're still looking at, the biggest screen that we have is like, a 24-inch or something. So he just knew, he mapped out the lenses and he knew like, if someone goes like this, they're going to be out of focus.
Wow.
He was so instrumental in helping me figure all of that out. So anyway, long story short, we went to Thunder Road, our studio, and asked if we could shoot 3:1. And they were like, kind of went back and talked about it, and they said yes. I mean, they just jumped on board, and we did protect for 2.4 for streaming, but they're showing it in 3:1. So
awesome!
It is so cool, and there are shots that jump out so harshly to me. The Mads Mikkelsen is on the ceiling, and the camera tilts down and turns sideways as the gunman comes through the door, and my mind just fell right out of my face. It was such a cool shot. Second shot, she's in the bed. The camera pulls out and it's just bed springs all around.
The whole thing. Yeah.
The whole thing is bed springs. It is extraordinary, the effect that this has on the visual experience of this movie. I had no idea that the crop would have that kind of a sensory experience. I also watched it in my Vision Pro, out like as big as I could possibly get it, and it was extraordinary.
Well, and it definitely changed the way that we boarded the movie. I mean, again, I was really I'm so lucky on all of these projects because like we had almost 3 months to prep in Budapest. So it was like Brian, the production designer, costume designer, visual effects, we all started together. And I'm used to there have been sets designed and things designed. So like we literally brought in finders and framed up to make the window the right size, to make the hallway the right size, just so that it would fit into the aspect ratio. So like things were actually even designed around how we were shooting, which is, that's a real luxury these days to be able to do that. And I think it's one of the reasons that the film is the film that it is, that, we didn't have 4 weeks of prep and come in and just kind of slam it all together and okay, well, this will be, it'll be fine like that. Like if Brian didn't like a wallpaper that was, printed in Denmark, he would send it back and they'd bring back another roll. And, it was like a lot of that. And, every costume was designed to match the set and every specific detail. I mean, Brian would see things in the corner of the frame that even I would be like, what are you looking at? And he'd go over there and like, I don't like that color. I don't like the way that's, So he and I were just peas in a pod. We literally just like linked arms, and we were just like, we're just crazy, nutty filmmakers, and we're just going to have a great time. So.
Oh, I love it. Well, and it's like throughout the entire film, whether it's it's really how everything blends together. The costumes blend together with the production design, which blends together with all the camera design and the way that you're lighting things. Like there are a number of times where you have very specific lights over people's heads. The shot is like perfectly symmetrical. And like it's just fantastic. And thinking about how all of that came together to capture, your work, putting all the right lighting in the space, including these lights that are over people's head, wherever it is, or the windows that are framing them perfectly, paired with their costumes. And I mean, it's magical watching all of that. And I think in a story that is, in some sense, a children's fantasy, in some sense, a fairly violent film, it actually all kind of comes together and it fits in this other world that you have kind of created. So I mean, kudos to the entire team for capturing something that does really bring a lot of magic to this world.
Yeah, and it's getting everybody on board, production designer designing lights that we knew were going to be used for that purpose, or keeping, this sort of, we had an idea of lots of circles, and, obviously the reference to him being an angel or not had a lot to do with it as well. But there was like this theme of circles, and all the windows were circles, and you felt kind of like you were in a strange boat, or in this, like, when we got to her bedroom, the window was a lot smaller, and Brian and I turned to Jeremy and we're like, we want the window to be bigger. And Jeremy was like, okay. And so he just took out his tape measure, and we like literally, he just chunked, took out another piece of the wall and made the window bigger. And then we came back, we're like, could it be a little bit bigger? We just kept like chiseling away and, just trying to push everything a little bit too far. So it sort of made you feel a little uncomfortable. And it was also like, felt like it was more in her head. Like when you're a kid and you see everything as being bigger than it really is, like, in reality, her window would have been a normal window, but when you're little, it's like you see things as being magical, and so that was one of the things that we liked about Janae Caro and also some other filmmakers. Brian's very heavily influenced by Spielberg, and just that whole sort of how do you see the world through a kid's eyes, and so we really tapped into that and tried to think about just never settling on something being normal. Camera, lighting, whatever we could do, which is really fun.
I would talk about Dust Bunny. It's so great, but it's a movie. And I just have a question about your worldview when it comes to shooting for the smaller screen around particularly projects like One Piece and Bad Sisters and what else? Truth Be Told. Massive kudos for attaching yourself to a project about podcasters. Wink. Where does your head go when you realize you're responsible for setting the tone of what could be a very long-running series, and your name is on season 1, episode 1? What does that mean to you?
It's funny. I don't think I approach it any differently than I would for a film, because I look at it as like, most of the time I'm only doing maybe one block or, a couple episodes. So I just look at it as like a little mini movie. And, you keep your fingers crossed that the people coming after you, want to keep it the same or want to continue your look. And, every director and every DP has a slightly different take on things. But I always find it to be really amazing how, even if there's like 12 directors and 7 DPs, how these TV shows still feel like there's a thread. And, of course, like people who are very dialed in will notice some of the jumps in certain episodes and things like that. But I think, if you kind of set a look, they can't really go too far away from it, because you kind of like, you've established template. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I definitely look at it any differently or think about it as more or less pressure. It's just kind of what's right, what's right for the story. So I just get really happy that I'm not pigeonholed as to being just one type of cinematographer, that people actually come to me for different types of looks, which is fun. Like, I know some people who are like, I only get called to do horror, or I only get called to do comedy. So I've tried to keep it diverse enough that I could, kind of wiggle into any genre that is out there, which is fun.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't hurt to have, both Sharon Horgan stuff with Bad Sisters and then Tyler Sheridan. Like, there's a Talk about somebody with a firm hand on a look and an aesthetic.
Yeah, I just finished Lioness season 3. So,
Oh,
Wow. Nice.
excellent.
Nice.
Excellent.
so that's going to be fun. And that's a whole, and this season looks very different than the first season. So yeah, again, super fun. I get to like jump in helicopters and be like super macho DP, which is super fun.
That's so awesome. Those will be great for your BTS shots on your IMDb page.
Exactly
I
right.
know, I actually do. I can't put them up yet, but I've seen great ones. My director this year is a director named DJ Caruso, who's an amazing feature director. He's actually in Wales right now doing a movie with Anthony Hopkins and Catherine Zeta-Jones, and he and I just we took so many pictures because we were just like, nobody shoots in helicopters anymore, like with real West cams and like, flying around, like with the helicopters like dipping down, and we're just like little kids. We were like giggling and laughing and we didn't want to get out of the helicopter. It was so much fun. So yes, at some point I'll be able to put some of those on there.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. I love it. Well, let's shift gears and start talking about The Conformist. This is the movie that you picked for the show. And, I'm fascinated by it, especially knowing that I'm assuming that, as it sounds like, the first time that you saw this was in your English class in high school. And how you kind of stepped into this film and finding a love for it, because it's a film that requires some learning as far as what's going on in the story. It's not a hand-holding sort of movie the way that I felt when I watched it. Is like Bertolucci kind of gives you this movie and you kind of have to understand what's going on in history to kind of appreciate the film. So how did you first kind of step into this film and find that it was something that you were drawn to?
I have a memory, like people say, I remember the first time I walked. My first steps. I remember sitting in that class and there's a scene where they're driving down this line of trees and the leaves are blowing and the windshield wiper is wiping. And I just remember just like something physically in my body changed where I just was like, I want to do that. I want to be able to create images like that. It just was so beautiful. It was like the perfect light on her in the car, and it's the most stunning scene, and it stuck with me when I went to film school. And obviously Storaro is just a huge influence for me, and Bertolucci. I mean, some people say when I who's your favorite celebrity, I'm like Storaro. I'm like, yeah. They're like, who's that? I'm like, oh, you meant an actor. I was like, oh, sorry. I was at a film festival and everybody was running over to try to talk to some celebrity, and I was running after Storaro. I was like, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to that guy. But
right.
yeah,
that's awesome.
It really, we watched a lot of Italian films, a lot of German films. I just was so blown away by the use of color, and then the film noir lighting and everything. It was like everything in that film. It's it's almost a textbook in filmmaking because it has so many genres packed into one film. But then it's also, like you said, it's not exactly like a perfect story. It's a little bit confusing and a little sort of out there. But at the end of the day, it is when you think about the actual sort of through line. It's a very simple story. It's just Bertolucci made it complicated. But it's a thriller, it's a psychological thriller. And, I can get into all the films that were influenced by it, that I think were influenced by it as well over the years, as I started watching more films too. When I was in film school and then when I was in Europe as well, just, seeing how those influences kind of crossed over and how revolutionary what they did was as well.
I think it's really interesting because the film, it takes place in a very particular point in time in Italy. And I think pairing with the visuals, it's the fact that they went to these very kind of brutalist style locations, these real locations, to actually film in these places. And I can't help but, in my mind, pair the visuals of the fantastic cinematography throughout the film with the spaces that they film in. When he walks into somebody's office and it's this person sitting at a desk on the far side of this giant room it felt very much of kind of like this, the kind of the brutalist, kind of the fascist sort of styling that they were living in at this time and kind of working through the I don't know, capturing in these real spaces to kind of like enhance the visual storytelling. And I think that's one of the things that made Storaro's the shots and everything stand out so much and made the story so stunning to just kind of watch, is because they were filming in these spaces that were such a key part of this point in history.
Yeah. And I think that's, one of the things that I took away from it as well, because most of my still photography was like, I would find bridges or different environments. And I always had a model. I didn't just take pictures of architecture, but I like to use the architecture and then put people in it. And so again, like when I saw that film, I was like, oh my gosh, like he's actually taking what I love about photography and putting it into film, which I hadn't seen before. And I think, for these last, decades that I've been shooting, I've always kept that, in the back of my mind, the symmetry, the wide shots. Like I will go as wide as possible, and especially for television, until they're like, wait a minute, don't forget, people are watching it on their phones. And I'm like, oh, okay. Then, then when you have to switch gears for
that
feature,
sounds like a them problem.
maybe, yeah, that's a them problem. Except for when I see my kids watching my shows on their phones. But then you have to switch gears. Then you go to shoot a movie, and if it's too close, then people are like, please get wider, when you're in a theater. So I think about that all the time, of like the way that people learned to be cinematographers and how to shoot has had to change as well, because you have to imagine you couldn't shoot a film all in wide shots anymore, because when it goes to stream, it's just, you're not getting close enough to your characters. So I think about that all the time when I'm shooting and when I'm watching things now too. So
that is such an interesting observation. That makes me, I just caught Marty Supreme, and it was that same experience. That movie is uncomfortably close for many of the character shots. And that I know is a Safdie staple. Like that's a thing that they want to create. And yet I find it deeply disconcerting. It's like not enough variety. It's like an oppressive sort of, especially when you watch it on a smaller screen for streaming, it becomes uncomfortable, unsettling.
I was just having this conversation about a project I might be doing, and we were talking about driving footage. And, there's very little time to do practical driving footage anymore. And so one of the things is, when you're seeing a lot of car work now, it's because it's on stage or it's on a volume. It's just close-ups. And so you're losing that scope that we used to get when everybody used to have to shoot driving practically. So when, or you can like have a lot of fun and go back and watch Dr. No, and then like the car's like 10 feet too close behind him in the rear projection, and it's hilarious, and they're like reacting to something that's like not even behind them, or it's like
yeah,
there's all those different kinds of driving moments. But it's something I think that people just forgot about a little bit, is to get that breath, and pull back so you can see more scope. You don't always have to cut in. One of the things in television that, we're always battling, and especially with guest directors, they're nervous not to do the coverage. And it's funny because Taylor Sheridan actually just told the director on one of our last episodes, like, you don't need to cut in so close all the time. I like those wide shots. Like, I want to see the sunsets, and I want to see, the helicopters flying in wide shots. And why would you cut into somebody in the helicopter when there's a beautiful sunset? And it's so true to it, because it is more cinematic.
Y'all watch any Taylor Sheridan show and you'll see exactly that worldview.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is a really interesting point, because, I don't know, it made me think of, I think it was Matt Damon who was just talking about the experience that he and Ben Affleck had when they were making The Rip, and how they were being told by Netflix that you need to repeat the plot more. We need to, because people are getting distracted. There's so many things that people are paying attention to on their phones these days, that we need those reminders of what the story is. So they were kind of forced to build those elements into the plot. And I think it also speaks to probably you and camera and all the different stuff that you now have to think about, which Storaro didn't have to think about when he was shooting The Conformist, because they were shooting for a theater, a movie theater. It was one place that people would watch it. I mean, they had TV by then, so inevitably they were thinking about the TV market at some point, but probably mostly Bertolucci and Storaro were focusing on the theatrical image. And so they only had one thing to think about. And now, as you're saying, you've got to think about theatrical image, but there's also the phone image, and there's the streaming image, and all of the different things that other people or that people are paying attention to. So we've created a type of project that people, when they're making these films or TV shows, they really have to be thinking about all the different potential ways that they're going to be viewed. And I imagine that that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, think about it too, just, how dark some of those films were, but they were in a theater with the lights off. And if you're watching something at home and you've got even just a little bit of ambient light, it's going to look too dark. So there's also that whole aspect that I know a lot of people are watching on planes, on trains, in their kitchen. And if you go too dark, they're not going to be able to see anything as well. So I've changed for television. I used to love to shoot things very dark, but I tend to not go quite as dark as I used to when I was a little bit younger. And it's just because, I see how people are watching things, my family and everybody, besides my husband and I, who's also a cinematographer, who watch it in a closet because that's how we want to see it. But yeah, so unless you're in the theater, you're never going to see it the way it was intended. And a film like The Conformist, I mean, there are inky blacks, it's very contrasty. And, I don't think that film would have translated to streaming as well. So, something about, going back to see those films, which is why we're so lucky, in Los Angeles, we have the Cinematech, so you can go see film prints, and we've got the Vista and all these amazing theaters that are showing things on film. But then a lot of times, like even at the Vista, there are films that were shot digitally, and then they don't do the expensive film prints and they look terrible. So, there's this sort of, all these different formats, it's insane. It's a lot to juggle.
Yeah. Well, then you have filmmakers who are shooting in multiple formats because they want the IMAX experience, but then they're also making sure that they can crop it down to all the different sizes. Like, oh my God, so many things to think about.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. And I do, it takes a little bit, but
yeah. The structure of this, it's non-chronological, which I think is, I don't know, one of the elements that makes it a little harder to get into, because you're trying to figure out what's going on and what Marcello is doing as far as this job that he's been given to go kill this former professor of his. And then we're kind of jumping back and forth in time. And again, like Bertolucci doesn't give you a lot as far as like what's going on story-wise, as far as like knowing the specifics. And I had to do some research on like what was happening in Italy at this particular point in time and try to figure out the story. Like, why is he over in France ready to assassinate this person? And I think that the non-chronological element of it actually... I know, I don't know, people have their opinions about, do you need to tell a story that way or not? But I thought it actually worked quite well for me as far as the way that it built the story to where we were going. How does that work for you? Did you find that it plays telling this particular story non-chronologically?
Well, I think it not only does it play, but I think that they use the visuals to accentuate that as well. It's like from certain colors and, certain times in his life where things were more colorful, things were darker, when you're like leaning into the fascism and all of that, when things start to get more down. And it was sort of like when I was talking about like films that I felt like really were influenced by this, that did sort of tip on that a little bit as well, like Blade Runner, for example, Apocalypse Now, just, how they used color and light to, create a mood and create some type of a psychological feeling from the viewer. And I didn't feel like I had seen that as much, because obviously, this is still kind of in the beginning. The film wasn't made in the beginning of color, but that time period is more like, when color was introduced. And I felt like they did that sort of like things were very, very black and white, desaturated, and then you have like these very colorful scenes. And I loved how they used that in terms of the story, jumping back and forth as well.
Yeah, there's some beautiful color differences throughout the story. Like, it's very warm kind of in his past in Rome, and then Paris is very cool, very blue, and everything, and then also tilting the camera, which I thought was pretty interesting. There's some driving shots in particular where you're watching a car go by, and we're getting these Dutch angles, which I think I'm sure that they were thinking about psychologically how they were using all of that throughout the course of the film.
Yeah, just like Orson Welles did. I mean, it's the same, right?
Yeah.
It's all psychology, and obviously the Conformist is on the outside is a much more sort of, I don't know if I want to say more modern, but if you put it next to A Touch of Evil, there's so many similarities. It's like all these filmmakers, but then because of the color, creates another mood, which is so beautiful. I mean, I'll never, like like you said, like the warm and then the super blue, even just letting the windows outside, just the outside was so blue. It almost looked like blue screen sometimes. It's crazy.
Yeah. Right. Like they were putting blue filters over the windows or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to ask him a couple of questions, and I speak Italian. So I was like speaking Italian with him, and he was just like, doesn't want to talk about it really. I was like,
oh.
Yeah, it was cute.
You're like, come on.
But wait, I've waited so long for this moment, please.
I think he still did not understand that I was a cinematographer after our entire conversation, to be honest.
Well, I think there's another piece of the film that I think is that I just couldn't stop really focusing on. First of all, it's a very sexy film, and I think that starting with like just watching him walk down the street in those suits with the hat tilted just right, like everything is so straight and perfect, and then he captures the sort of the implicit sensuality of the two women dancing together in the group. It is captured so perfectly with light and shadow off of the curves of their backs and their shoulders. The way they look at each other is it ends up being a just sort of a wildly progressive experience that flies directly in the face of so much of the authoritarian, the sort of fascist worldview that the film is critiquing, and it's just so easy to get lost in the world of these people trying to figure out where their bodies and minds belong in this universe, and how Storaro manages to lock that down in the frame is juicy.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it is, again, being in school as a 10th grader watching this movie with all these guys, I probably had crushes on in my class. It was like, it's sexy. It's really sexy. And then seeing two women together, and I remember like some of the guys are like, ooh, girls together.
Yeah, right.
Kind of like, the ones who were not interested in film. Just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, right.
That was another thing that definitely resonated for me. It was like the first time I'd seen a movie that, was something that felt sexually visual and beautiful at the same time, and I think that they were, whatever they did, listen, I always, sometimes I'm like, how much of it is really the photography, because there's such a mix of what the actors are doing as well. They're contributing to it. Like if it wasn't them, and also too, I'll never forget, I grew up in California, so everybody was blonde. And I remember like, she was like this gorgeous brunette too. I was like, with short hair. I was like, that's so cool. I was like, kind of like, or do all the women in Italy and France look like that? Like they look so different, I was like, kind of amazing. So yeah, I know it was, and just again, I think, just, going back, like you were saying, just to those tropes of like, the film noir, and just his suits and the symmetry of everything, and how perfect everything was when, his world was unraveling. So it's, I know that's all on purpose, but it comes across kind of like we were talking about. If it doesn't like hit you over the head as something that doesn't belong, then it's appropriate for the story, which is, the thing that I think I noticed right away. Was, it wasn't necessarily like the film that I remembered throughout my career as being the most visual film that I would go back to necessarily, but as a whole, it made sense across the board from start to finish.
There's so much of it that feels improvisational almost, right? Like the moves they make, the walking, the way they cross the street, the way they get into cars. I found myself really ruminating on Bertolucci's boards. Like I'd like to see what he envisioned before they actually committed it to film. That's a curiosity, an ongoing curiosity.
Yeah, I haven't done a deep dive into that. I now I'm going to, because it would, you wonder, first of all, it's like, you're like, how many days did they have? It's like, we have to do
right.
like that film now, they would probably give them like, 25 days or something. Like, did they have 50 days? Because it's just, it was so much harder to do things and, to get that kind of visual work done, and, and slower film. And I mean, all that, I always look at this and I think about that they didn't have the tools that we have now to do the shots that they did, and to, all that sort of work. And I try to think about that sometimes when I'm like, oh, I can't get a technocrane and a matrix head to do the shot I want to do. It's not in the budget, so we got to think of another way to do it. And that's just that's what we have to do now. And back, when they were shooting these films, that they didn't have those tools. So, and they were still so incredible.
Yeah.
Well, at least we know that, assuming that the Italian films were being still shot with no sound on set, at least they were able to move a little faster without having to worry about that. And then they could just record all the audio later.
Well, yeah, especially when you go there and you're like, oh my God, why is everybody speaking so funny in one language?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Dubbing. It's still every film still dubbed. It's amazing.
It's such a fascinating element that they do.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It's like different places, like India. Everybody, they always have other people sing the songs. I don't know why the actors don't sing their songs, but who knows? But it's just like everyone has their own little quirks. But
I know it's hilarious. Yeah, there's a great script that was sort of out there for a while called Dubbing De Niro, and it was all about the guy who played De Niro for all the De Niro movies in Italy, and he was a huge celebrity because he was
nice.
De Niro. Nobody ever heard Robert De Niro. They only heard him.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
That's so funny. Our guest last month is from Brazil, and he was talking about how the dubbing work down in Brazil is so high end that he often prefers watching the American films, dubbed into Portuguese, because he thinks that those performers sometimes give better performances than the ones that
oh my gosh,
the people get.
Yeah,
so,
I hope
it's very funny.
I hope he didn't say wolf actors, because they're gonna never want to work with him. But
yeah,
yes, no, he's very careful.
Right. Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, I like Meryl Streep's, dubber better. It's like,
no. Right, yeah. Yeah, watch out who you're talking about.
That's what I mean. Like, this guy was more famous than De Niro. It's like, it's crazy. It's crazy, but it is like,
That's so funny.
I've always found it fascinating because to me, it's so important to hear the voices of these actors. And so when you go overseas and these movies are dubbed, you're just kind of like, how different they must be, to those people. They never see them in English, so they don't know any better. But still, yeah, that's a whole other podcast for you guys.
For sure.
A whole other world. Yeah, no kidding. That's a fascinating one, though.
Yeah, it really is.
This film has such an interesting, the way that the ending plays. I love speaking of looks, but also just kind of like the world of our story, as this, he's hired to, like, his job is to go kill this person. And the way that they shoot that sequence in the forest is just, again, speaking of just like beautifully shot sequences that give so much to kind of the mood and the tone of what we're seeing. We just kind of got this really moody forest with these roads winding through the trees and everything. And it's beautifully shot. And I think I'm curious your thought on how that kind of fits into the scope of all the other stuff we're shooting, because so much of the story is in cities and buildings and all these beautiful places. And again, sometimes these very fascistic kind of designs and everything. But here we are in this place that's completely natural for kind of that climax of the film. Does that play into, is there anything psychological, you think, as far as like their decisions to do that? Or how have you read that?
Again, I think, it was just to really have a change of space, so that you felt like you were outside of that world where he had so much control. And, and I hate to keep jumping to like filmmakers that were influenced. To go back to, I remember that sequence so well. And then I remember when I saw Miller's Crossing and I was like, wow,
yeah.
remember the sequence in Miller's Crossing, and I was like, oh, that's so incredible how much that feels like that sequence, but taken from a different perspective. And I remember that was when I started realizing all the filmmakers that were influenced by Bertolucci, like Wes Anderson and Ridley Scott and, all these different filmmakers. And I was like, and the Coen, nobody ever talks about the Coen brothers being influenced by Bertolucci or Storaro, and Deakins, how much Deakins was influenced by Storaro, obviously. When you look back at those types of sequences and you realize psychologically, like you said, how it makes you feel that you are, there's nowhere to run, basically, is what that is that you're in a forest, and that's finite unless someone changes their mind.
Yeah.
You're going down like every mob movie.
Yeah.
You go to the forest and then it's time. It's your time to go.
Right. You're no longer in your element.
I'm so glad you brought up the Deakins, because I think he's another one of those who has a real eye for capturing the conflict that exists in endless open spaces that feel like end of experience, right? The forest is a beautiful natural environment where, all things being equal, you should be able to run until your legs fail. You should be free forever. And yet, here you are. It's the end. It is finite. He did the same thing in Blade Runner. He did the same thing. Like he's been creating those kinds of experiences, and I think that's a Storaro type. Absolutely.
It's like what it's just what always stuck with me, and why I wanted to talk about this film is it's the scope for a very simple story. It's like, just because. And whenever I meet on films with directors, they always say to me, like, the thing that I feel like I'm missing in my last project is scope. And I'm like, and they're like, because we didn't have enough money. And I'm like, it's not about the money. It's about being brave enough to be like, we're going to shoot really wide and then we're going to shoot close up. And you have to get rid of your sensibility of mediums, because, it just doesn't fit into that. You don't want to jump from a super wide to a medium shot, because then you're just doing coverage. So you want to go like in the Conformist, these big wide shots, and then you get these beautiful close-ups. And then you feel like you're in his head in that moment when he's trying to, come to terms with the fact that he has to kill him. And, it's just that type of filmmaking is, something that I do believe is something that you come up with your director as a cinematographer, because you have to be prepared for that, in terms of the type of lenses that you choose. Like I every time I get onto a project, I always have lenses that I'm not sure the director will like because they're so wide. I love wide lenses. And then, I always end up using them, and they're always so happy. They're like, oh, no one's ever shown me that lens before. And I'm like, I know it's really wide, but it just gives you a different sense of, it's like a different feeling than those middle ground, and listen, I love them all. I love long lens shows. I love super wide, tight. I love everything. I don't have a certain idea, but I just tend to resonate always, probably because of my photography background. I always used to use wide lenses. I didn't have zooms. So it was like, I'd have one or two lenses. So it was like you either pulled back or you went in tight with your wide lens. And I've always really liked that. And I've tended not to use long lenses very much in any of my work. So.
Well, it's beautiful.
Fantastic. I mean, it's a great place to end this conversation. Wonderful film. Thank you so much for bringing it onto the show. I mean, it's one that does require some homework just to understand the context of the story as to what's going on. But it is a stunning film to watch. Just beautiful.
Truly.
And the way that it comes to that finale is just kind of a little bit of a shocking ending, that final little twist that we have there, which I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for bringing this one to the show.
I always say to people, think of elegant darkness when you want to watch this film. That's kind of the best thing I can think of to describe it, because it's like there's dark for dark And then there's elegant dark, which is, this film or The Godfather or, Citizen Kane or anyway, lots of films. But I try to think of it that way because a lot of people say, oh, it needs to be darker, dark. I want it to be dark, dark, dark. And I'm like, well, what is it? What is dark to you? It's not just dark in terms of like light. It's also about dark story. And I always tell people to watch The Shining and be like, go watch The Shining. It's so much in daylight and it's terrifying,
Still terrifying. Yeah. Right.
Still terrifying. Yeah. Yeah.
Outstanding.
Have you had a chance to see this on the big screen? Have you like a film print of this before?
Not since I was in high school. I have not seen a film print of it since I was in high school. And
Wait, your English teacher showed you a film print of it?
That's all there was. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there probably was a VHS copy of it somewhere. But yeah, no, he showed us that he had a film projector and he had someone come in and actually project for us. Yeah, it's crazy. He was amazing.
Oh, I love it.
I think we did watch a couple things on VHS as well.
Yeah.
I do remember. So, but Conformist was film. Yeah. Yeah. We had a tiny little auditorium, but it was where they had the theater. And they did bring this one in on film, but I have not seen it projected in a long time. And it's really funny because I actually took my son to see The Godfather projected at the Cinematech recently. And he just was like, it was such a different movie for him to see it projected than it was to see it on television. Like he really felt it, like the difference in the experience.
That's great.
So
that's great to hear.
Yeah. I'm going to tap the Cinematech. I need to go back again.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for coming on the show to be part of this. Do you have any projects that you want to plug? I mean, obviously, Dust Bunny, people need to check that out. It's streaming right now. But any other things that are coming up that people should be keeping an eye out for?
Nothing yet that I can talk about. I mean, I love Lioness, so I'm excited for season 3 to come out, which will be coming out. But my other projects, not yet.
Gotcha.
Hopefully soon there's another Netflix show coming out and some things. So
awesome. Do you have any socials to plug? Do you have any place out there on the internet where people can find you?
I am pretty much just on Instagram, so it's NicoleWhitaker.dp. I keep it simple.
Excellent.
Otherwise, I don't have time.
And people can follow you there, presumably to learn about some of these upcoming projects as well, right?
Yeah, I have not posted anything yet because I can't until they come out.
But when you do, yeah.
When I do,
right.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Awesome. Well, Nicole, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
If this episode sent you down an Italian cinema rabbit hole, costume designer Jenny Bevan joined us to talk about The Leopard, Visconti's 1963 masterpiece about the decline of the Sicilian aristocracy, which is visually and morally almost the opposite of everything the Conformist is doing. If you want to follow Vittorio Storaro specifically, cinematographer Paul Cameron joined us to talk about Apocalypse Now, another film that defines what Storaro can do with light and moral ambiguity. And if you want to stay in Bertolucci's world, the next reel covered Once Upon a Time in the West. He co-wrote the story with Sergio Leone. Same period, completely different genre, and worth the comparison. Thanks again to Nicole for joining us today. For everyone out there, we hope you enjoyed the show, and certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. Movies We Like is part of the True Story FM network and part of the Next Reel family of film shows. Our theme is Chong Clap by Out of Flux. Find us at truestory.fm and follow The Next Reel on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can also watch full episodes on the Next Reel YouTube channel. If you'd like to learn about becoming a member of the Next Reel family of film shows, visit truestory.fm/join. That's truestory.fm/join. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love your rating and review wherever you listen. See you next time.